friends! I'm excited to welcome you back to another video. This time we're going to be talking about books that I read in 2023, specifically the rereads that really stuck out to me, as well as the books that didn't quite make the cut when it comes to my top 12 of the year, which is an entirely different video, which is coming soon. Without further ado, we're going to talk about the books that almost made the cut for my top reads. And we're just a little bit shy of that because I was trying to be really picky about my top 12 reads of the year. And the rereads will be coming later. I'm actually going to start with all of the runners-up first. So that is the initial section of this video. The first book that I want to mention in this video, I had seen going around a lot. I really liked the cover and the premise sounded interesting. But the real reason I had picked it up was because my friend DJ from Life in Fiction, I will leave his handle and the link to his Instagram down below. You should give him a follow. He was the one who recommended reading it, and I'm so glad I listened because I really enjoyed The Undertaking of Hart and Mercy, which is by Megan Bannon. In this book, we have two main characters. We have Hart, who is a marshal who patrols the wilds of Tanria, who finds himself constantly at odds with an undertaker named Mercy, and she's basically the one who's been keeping her family business afloat all by herself. So they end up also becoming pen pals at some point, who build a friendship by exchanging some letters that express their honest feelings and experiences. The real question is, will finding out who the person they're writing to is affect this growing connection between them and what will happen from there. This is a fantasy romance, but it's not quite like anything I've read really, because it feels really cozy but also still has those fantastical elements and high stakes in it, which I really liked. I also really enjoyed getting to know Hart and Mercy and their companions in this book. It was really sweet to sort of see their relationship change as they got to know each other. I didn't realize, honestly, how emotionally invested I had become in them until I hit the end. I literally teared up at the end of this book, which is always a good sign when it comes to anything I'm reading. This was one of those books where I was really content to just let the plot unfold and take me on a journey. I love that I ended up so emotionally invested in it. A very similar thing actually happened with this next book. It is a companion novel sequel to something I also read and enjoyed, and this book is Hook, Line, and Sinker, which is by Tessa Bailey, and this is the second book in the Bellinger Sisters duology. This one is a deliciously fun rom-com that is about a former player who accidentally falls for his best friend while trying to help her land a different man. We actually meet the two main characters in this, Fox and Hannah, in the other book, and I was already really delighted with them there and just enjoyed getting to spend more time with them here. I thought it was a real treat just to hang out with them some more, to watch their friendship and see how that blossomed into something more than that. It was really also nice just to see both of these characters come into their own, where they're facing down their insecurities or their doubts about themselves and going after what they really want or who they really want and not backing down from that. I also really liked that this also had a cozy vibe because it's still set in Westport, which is the small cozy fishing town that we are first introduced to in It Happened One Summer. And even though we actually spend a little less time there than we did in the first book, it was still nice to just see that community aspect really woven into the story. I also really enjoyed the nods to music in this one. That was really fun to have as an extra element in it. So yeah, I had a really good time reading this one. Again, it made me emotional by the ending, which is all I can really ask for. The next book that I want to talk about is The Spirit Glass, which is by Roshni Chokshi. This is actually a book that almost made the cut for favorites of the year. It was one of the last books I read in 2023, and it still left quite the impression. The main character, Corazon, wants to start her babaylan training with her Aunt Tina because she wants to be able to bring her parents permanently back from the dead. But when the soul key that she uses to visit with them is stolen by a vengeful ghost, she ends up being sent on a quest in order to fashion a new soul key that will actually lay this ghost to rest. There are a lot of things that I really enjoyed about this, one of them being the main character, Corazon. I thought she was a wonderful character to be going along with for this adventure, and I really enjoyed the very eventful quests that she ended up embarking on and the friends and companions she finds along the way as well. I'm particularly fond of her Anito Sasso. I think he is just great comedic relief. He kind of gives me a little bit of the vibes of Salem from Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And like all of other Roshni Chokshi's works, there are whimsical touches and beautiful flourishes of language that are part and parcel of this story. I loved how she incorporated Filipino lore into it as well. It felt very magical and whimsical, and I don't know, it felt really heartwarming to see elements that I really recognized and could identify with. The biggest thing that hit me about this book were the themes woven throughout the story. there are a lot of very meaningful and impactful ones. They're very centered on relationships and dealing with emotions. I found that so overwhelmingly beautifully done that I just really enjoyed it, and this book was wonderful. The next book that I want to talk about is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries by Heather Fawcett. A lot of people have talked about this one already. I am one of those people who also really enjoyed it. In this one, a curmudgeonly professor journeys to a small town. It's in the far north to study fairy folklore and discovers magic and friendship and love while she is there. I'll admit, it took me a little bit to warm up to this narrator and the narrative style with which this is written, because it's written in journal entry form, which usually works for me, but for some reason it took me a little longer than I would have liked to get into it. But once I did, I felt like I really settled into it, and it felt cozy and comfortable, sort of like a worn-in cottage that you visit again and again and again, which is a little ironic given that the setting in this one is pretty wintry, though she does stay in a cottage. I do really like how heavily this leans into fairy lore. It is part of the backbone of the plot, and I really like the way that it didn't gloss over how some fairies can be fascinating but also terrible. It did a great job of balancing like the appealing parts of fairy and fairy lore, but you know, the horrific things they have done as well, or that they can be doing as well. I really feel like it was a modern fairy tale of sorts. I am a sucker for those kinds of stories. It was really cool to have that narrated by a character like Emily Wilde, who is really hyper-focused on what she loves, which is studying and documenting fairies and fairy lore. So this was a very enjoyable reading experience for me. The next book is a book I've been meaning to read for a long time, and I finally got to it. If We Were Villains, which is by M.L. Rio, and I was really blown away by how quickly I consumed this one. Main character Oliver Marks is finally being released from jail after serving 10 years for a murder that he may or may not have committed. The detective who put him behind bars and who was on the case just wants to know the truth. So one of the things that I was particularly drawn to when I first heard about this book is that it also centers around these characters who live and breathe Shakespearean theater. As someone who is interested in the Bard and has read a lot of his work and considers herself a fan, I really liked how the Bard was woven into this tale. It felt like one of his tragedies, and a lot of the story elements and the structure felt like reading one of Shakespeare's tragedies or something, inspired very heavily by that. And I didn't love the characters, which is usually something that I want in the books that I read, but given how extreme their range of personalities proves to be, it's not really that surprising. In many ways, their complexity and the flaws and their strengths that were showcased throughout the novel really made them even more impossible to look away from. There's really some sort of charismatic draw to this group of characters. Also, there's the exciting element of like finding out what actually happened too. I devoured this one while I was away on vacation. If a book can keep me that preoccupied while I'm on vacation, I think that's a good sign as well. The next book is actually one I don't own, and that's because I really want to own a paperback to match the rest of the books that I have by this author duo, and that is The True Love Experiment, which is by Christina Lauren. This is a companion novel to The Soulmate Equation, which I also really loved. Sparks fly when a romance novelist and a documentary filmmaker join forces to craft the next perfect Hollywood love story and take both of their careers to the next level, but that's only if they can keep the chemistry between them from taking the whole thing off script. The main character in this one, Fizzy, is someone who I've loved since I first encountered her in The Soulmate Equation, and her love story matches her personality perfectly. It's enthusiastic, it's bright, and it's so unexpected, and it really was such a bright spot for me in the year that I spent reading. I laughed a lot while reading this book, which doesn't really happen that often, but it also brought me very deep into my feelings at various points on both Fizzy and Oliver's behalf. I really love that it was pretty undeniable, the connection that was between these two, and the way that they cared for each other and supported each other was really lovely to read about. I also really like how this book celebrates romance and fandom and just the joy of falling in love and being loved and being loved. It all just culminated into something so heartwarming and so wonderful, and I really like that a lot. The next book we have to show off is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. Cutthroat literary agent Nora Stephens agrees to go on a trip to Sunshine Falls with her sister after her sister keeps begging her to do it, only to find herself constantly having run-ins with this brooding book editor named Charlie Lastra in a series of coincidences that kind of feel like a rom-com. This book was really cozy and comforting, kind of gave me that vibe I have when I'm like in a really calm brunch place, like a calm, cozy one. This book as it sounds from the synopsis, has that very small town Hallmark rom-com vibe, although it does end in a way that feels a little bit more realistic than some of those films might. Nora and Charlie are not my usual favorite kind of character to read about, but I did enjoy getting to know them with this book. I love that they both work in the book industry and are clearly passionate about their jobs and about books. Like, that's always a win for me when it comes to the characters I love. I like that they were both really no-nonsense, straightforward people, and they just have soft spots for the people that they love and cherish in their lives. It was fun to read about their banter and their dynamic and to just watch them bicker and sort of like tease each other. I think it was really something that added a little extra to the book in a way that I really appreciated. My favorite thing about this one actually is the sister relationship between Nora and her sister Libby. It called to mind aspects of my own relationship with my sisters and had me really teary-eyed and emotional by the end. The next book I had on my radar because it blew up and was everywhere, but I specifically read it because Kristen from Merrily Kristen told me to, and that book is Legends and Lattes, which is by Travis Baldree. In this one, the main character Viv is tired of battles and bloodshed and has decided to retire her sword in order to settle down in a small town and open up her very own coffee shop. This book was absolutely what it promised to be, which was cozy and comforting, and it definitely gave me the vibes of being in a coffee shop, just, you know, having a nice cup of coffee, grabbing a pastry, reading a book. It was delightful. I really enjoyed reading about Viv working hard to establish her new coffee shop with the help of friends who were old and new. Like, she had obstacles that she had to overcome, but everything felt very slice of life, so it was a bit low stakes and pretty chill, and it really was a relaxing fantasy read. I love the emphasis in this one on forming connections and of how finding your people and your place in the world makes a whole lot of a difference. The next book is Off to the Races by Elsie Silver, which is the first book in her Gold Rush Ranch series, and I picked this one up because my friend Rachel from Hello Chelly really loved it, and I'm happy to report I did too. In Off to the Races, we have two main characters. We have Billy, who is the new trainer at Gold Rush Ranch, and she's determined to put down roots and sort of make a name for herself and make a problem horse an actual winner. The only potential thorn in her plans is her new boss, Von Harding. There's serious chemistry between them, and she also finds herself unable to look away from his brooding, sensitive side. I fell head over heels in love with Gold Rush Ranch and this cast of characters and the so-called problem horse. This happened despite the fact that I don't necessarily love time skips, which happened a lot on this book, and the whole tell not show thing, which also I felt happened a lot in this book. There wasn't really a lot of time spent developing like the on-page relationship of the main couple. I still thought it was really compelling though. I really liked Billy. I thought she was really capable, she was really determined, and she's a horse girl through and through with a very strong independent streak and also like a sassy mouth. And I also really enjoyed Vaughn. Watching them fall in love was a real treat because it really does start with them being physically attracted to each other, but eventually becomes something much deeper. It was just such a compelling thing to watch as they fell in love. I got really emotionally invested in their romance as well as the other plot points in this book. The next book is Twisted Games, which is by Anna Huang. This was the year I finally read an Anna Huang series, actually, because I finished the whole series, and Twisted Games is one of my two favorites. In this one, we have an elite bodyguard named Reese Larson, and he basically has two rules. He has to protect his clients at all costs and don't get emotionally involved. And he's never really been tempted to do that until his latest client, who is Princess Bridget von Ashburg, who has found herself suddenly thrust into a rulership position that she has not prepared for at all and didn't count on happening in her lifetime. So I didn't love the fact that this one also has time skips, which honestly at this point you guys know slightly my nemesis. It does happen at the start of this book, and I was forewarned because there's an author's note about it, so that helped a lot. But I loved Reese. His stoic, broody personality was super appealing, and I loved how thoughtful and loyal he was, and the fact that he was so in love with Bridget. I couldn't. I loved him. And I loved how Bridget was so warm and so kind and determined to do the right thing. She is afraid of the authority that she is suddenly presented with, but manages to somehow handle it with grace and poise, despite the fact that her inexperience often leads her to make mistakes or make missteps. And I love them both a lot. I really like getting to know them individually, but it was also such a treat to watch them fall for each other. I kind of knew what the romantic conflict was going to be, but I did like the way that ended up getting resolved, and I also enjoyed all of like the forbidden romantic tension and the sexy times along the way. Like, that was really fun to read, and it just was so compelling, and I had a lot of fun. I also needed to mention that I read Twisted Hate, and I needed to put it on this list because I enjoyed this one as well. This is the book that follows after Twisted Games. In this one, we have future Dr. Josh Chen, who is the brother of the main character in the first book, and he's never met a woman he couldn't charm except for his younger sister's best friend, former party girl and aspiring lawyer Jules Ambrose. They are two very fiery personalities, and they find themselves ending up in an enemies with benefits agreement, where the agreement is no jealousy, no strings, and no falling in love. This is probably the one of the Twisted series that I had the most fun reading, because I feel like I just laughed a lot while reading it, and also was just like super invested in the romance in this one. It has one of my all-time favorite tropes, which is my best friend's older brother, one of my favorites, and this is so well done. I love that there are other romantic tropes tossed into this story in such fun ways, and I liked reading about the sexy interactions and the meaningful exchanges that our characters had as they find themselves going from enemies to reluctant friends to something more. Like, watching them fall in love with each other felt so surreal because I was falling in love with these characters as they fell in love with each other, so that was a pretty fun experience for me. I particularly enjoyed the cameos from the other characters in this book. Like, there have been cameos in the other books as well, but like for some reason I thought the ones in this one were particularly fun. The one thing that holds me back from putting this on my favorites list is just that there was a lot of dramatic aspects that I didn't necessarily love. Like, they didn't bother me all that much either, but they weren't necessarily my favorite thing. But overall, this book was super enjoyable. Next, we have to talk about One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake, which is such a good book. The good read summary is: in modern-day Manhattan, where we lay our scene, two rival witch families fight to maintain control of their respective criminal empires. In case you couldn't already tell, this one has Shakespearean inspiration as well, specifically Romeo and Juliet. This is actually my favorite Olivia Blake book, and another captivating story that comes from her mind. She writes books with such interesting concepts, and this is no exception. I just really enjoy this one because it includes so many of my favorite things. One, like I said, it has ties to and inspiration from Shakespeare, but not just Shakespeare, it also kind of has fairy tale vibes as well. And it's set in New York City. It's got some witty commentary. There are complex relationships and interesting characters. I think my preference overall was for secondary characters more than the main characters, but that's a personal thing. I like that it was a pretty simple plot, but it had some unexpected turns, and I just had a really good time. I actually kind of want to reread it, to be honest with you, and just like mark up all the parts that I enjoyed best. The next series that I want to talk about, I don't actually own as well because I listened to them all on audiobook, but I had to mention it here because I had such a good time, and that's the Dark Elements trilogy, which is by Jennifer L. Armentrout. So that starts with White Hot Kiss, continues on in Stone Cold Touch, and ends with Every Last Breath. There's also a novella called Bittersweet Love. In this trilogy, we follow a main character named Layla, who is a girl who just wants to live a normal life. Unfortunately, she's a half demon, half gargoyle. She has abilities that are unlike anyone else's. The guy that she has a longtime crush on, Zane, who is a full-blooded gargoyle and who she can actually kill with a kiss. But then a demon named Roth enters her life, reveals some surprising information, and it marks the start of a series of events that could result in the end of the world as they all know it. I have said this many times already, but I am a huge fan of JLA's earlier work, especially in YA, because the lore in them for some reason always feels really unique and refreshing to me when I read it. This one deals in particular with angels, demons, and gargoyles, which is a combination I didn't see coming, but I probably should have. Oh, and not to mention witches, and I really enjoyed seeing how she played around in that particular sandbox. The pacing in this one is really snappy, and I like the balance between action and romance and lore in it. I feel like I never had a moment where it felt like I was dragging my feet or having to, get myself through reading certain parts in the series, and I also think that it ended very satisfyingly as well. I also enjoyed getting to know the cast of characters a lot, especially as it slowly revealed what they're capable of, how they interact with other people, and what their role in the story was going to be. I thought that was really well done, especially since she was juggling quite a few characters, even though everything is pretty much from Layla's perspective. Okay, speaking of series, another new to me one that I read also at the very end of 2023 was the Dragon Realm series. I specifically only read the first 3 books, but I do feel like that concludes a part of the story already. So we have Dragon Mountain, Dragon Legend, and Dragon City. These were so much fun, and I could highly recommend. I'm a little upset that I put off reading them for so long. In the first book, Billy Chen is sent to this special summer camp in China, only to find himself among a group of very special kids who find and bond with dragons in order to save the world. Listen, the thing that I love most about this is obviously that the kids meet and bond with dragons. Like, that is something that I have always imagined that I would get to do, and that hasn't changed, so I quite enjoyed that aspect a lot. Their adventures are really action-packed and magical, but they were also much more heartbreaking and emotionally a roller coaster, really, of an experience than I expected them to be, but that's not a bad thing. I think the way that they were written and how, these things are handled felt pretty good to me overall. I really love that I got to read in a book series where I got to fall in love with an ensemble cast and just get really invested in this adventure that they were going on. So this was a fun time. I am also looking forward to reading the other books set in this world and by this author duo. We've now made it to the rereads portion of this video, and everything I'm going to talk about is a series. Are we surprised? No. So first we're going to talk about, this one's kind of a weird mix because I reread 2 books in the series so I could read the last book in the series, and that is the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy by Stephanie Garber. So we have Once Upon a Broken Heart, we have The Ballad of Never After, and we have A Curse for True Love. In Once Upon a Broken Heart, Evangeline Fox makes a very ill-advised agreement, or a deal, with the Prince of Hearts, which kickstarts an adventure that's right out of a fairy tale filled with magic and mayhem. What I especially love about this entire series is obviously the very heavy, whimsical fairy tale vibes. I love that Stephanie Garber takes all of these recognizable fairy tale character types and tropes, and she really just plays with them, whether she uses them the way they would normally be used in a fairy tale or turning them on their head. One of the other things that I really love is Evangeline Fox herself. She is my favorite of Stephanie Garber's main characters because I felt like her personal journey of growth from the very first book until the very last page of the series was just stellar. It felt really relatable and real, and in many ways Evangeline reminds me of myself, so can't help but see that. I also really love Jax, or the Prince of Hearts, a whole lot. I have enjoyed him since we first meet him in her Caraval series, and I especially enjoyed getting to know him a little bit better through the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy. He's forever going to be my book Klaus Michelson. I have said this before and I will say it again, like there's just so many moments that I had to mark as Klaus coded because they were there and I love them. This series is definitely an all-time favorite. That was cemented after I read the last book and also really enjoyed it, and I just love it so much, and I could always see myself going back and rereading this one again just for the vibes. The last 2 series that I'm going to mention are both by the same author. They're both by Rick Riordan. And to start, we have the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series, which is The Lightning Thief, The Sea of Monsters, The Titan's Curse, The Battle of the Labyrinth, and The Last Olympian. So I actually ended up rereading the entire Percy Jackson series because of the live action that is currently airing on Disney Plus right now. The series is obviously about Percy Jackson, and he's always known that he's different. He eventually finds out that he's actually a half-blood, a demigod, and what that means is that 1, he is a target for monsters and therefore needs to learn how to protect himself. 2, he's not really alone because there's an entire camp full of kids who are like him. And 3, he's about to end up on a series of quests. Returning to the Percy Jackson series is a lot like coming home. I have read these multiple times over the years, and every single time I still really enjoy it. Getting to see my old friends and hang out with them, getting to be on their adventures again despite all the stressors that entails, it was really comforting despite all of those ups and downs and going arounds that they embark on. And it's one of those things where, like, even though I knew exactly how the series was going to play out, I still thought it was really enjoyable to experience it all over again, and I was happy to just go with the flow. The series also just gets me in the feels. Like, I laugh a lot, but I also get emotional a lot and really teary-eyed, and sometimes I'm just like so heart-warmed by what's going on the page. And I also really love, again, how Rick Riordan weaves Greek mythology into the pages of these books. Like, I find it very fun, I find it very entertaining, and also really smart. One of my favorite series of all time, that's for sure. And last but not least, the series I'm probably gonna have the most trouble holding up together, and that's the Heroes of Olympus series. So that is The Lost Hero, the Son of Neptune, the Mark of Athena, the House of Hades, and the Blood of Olympus. This is actually a spin-off of the Percy Jackson series because it really takes place right after the events of that. So I would definitely say that you probably should read Percy Jackson first if you don't want to get spoiled for that series. Anyway, in this one, 7 half-bloods have to work together as prophesied in order to save the world. That is an oversimplification of the plot of this entire series, but it is so good. My gosh. Returning to this entire series was like epic and heartbreaking and incredible, and I am happy to do it all again at some point. Like the Percy Jackson series, it's just fun being around old friends and favorites and going on these epic adventures with them. They are just so fun. They're so fun, and they're so good, and they're so well done, and I really enjoyed that. This one is actually a lot heavier than the Percy Jackson series, and I feel like the stakes felt even more dire and higher than the first one, or the first series, but I loved seeing this crew come together and form their bonds and relationships and work together in order to do what they've got to do. I like the found family aspect of this story. Of course, I loved the way the mythology was woven in, and the humor, and the heart, the action. Everything about this still so perfect to me, even until this day. I love this series. Again, another all-time favorite. And with that, we've come to the end of my rereads and runners-up video for 2023 reads. I'm glad you stuck around to watch this video. I hope you really enjoyed it, and I hope you will stick around for some more videos coming up in the future. And I'll see you guys with a new video very soon. Bye!